YANA Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. We're here at the Yale Club in the council room on the 18th floor. This is the actual birthplace of YANA. January 2011, take you back almost 11 years ago now. But welcome. This is our first time that we're actually back here since February of 2020. And we're very excited because our panel tonight is a subject that's, I think, near and dear to a lot of us, and that is using the gateway of sports to help reach and to develop underserved youth in New York City. We've got a stellar panel tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Andrea McChristian, Yale 08, who will do the introductions and frame tonight's conversation. Andrea?
Thank you so much, Ken. Really appreciate that. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to YANA's Town Hall, empowering underserved youth through the gateway of sports. Again, my name is Andrea McChristian, Yale College class of 2008, and I serve as the Law and Policy Director for the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice out of Newark, New Jersey. And it's my honor to moderate tonight's dynamic conversation with this powerhouse panel of nonprofit leaders, Terence Lee, who's here joining us virtually, Ted Smith, and Tim McChristian, who are taking unique and effective approaches to supporting and uplifting our young people through sports programming. I'd also like to thank Ken and Rachel for the invitation to moderate tonight. And just as a run of show, I'm just going to set up a few framing remarks and then introduce the panel. I'll then engage with the panel on a number of prepared questions, and then hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So let's get started. A team isn't a bunch of kids out to win. A team is something you belong to, something you feel, something you have to earn. That quote from the American classic film The Mighty Ducks reflects how sports, particularly for under-resourced youth, is about more than just a game. It's about a family outside of family. It's about discipline. It's about leadership. And it's about building the necessary skills to become leaders both now and in the future. That's why for generations, sports have been used as a way to connect with youth to empower them, using a fun activity as a tool toward effective youth development. And this is a practice that our esteemed panel knows all too well, as they are each leading organizations that use sports and other programming to provide comprehensive and holistic support and guidance for under-resourced youth throughout New York City. Ted Smith, class of 2000, is Executive Director of New Heights Youth Incorporated, a nonprofit sports-based youth development and educational organization based in New York City. Ted worked as the first staff member of the organization, and in 2010 took over the reins as executive director. Born and raised in New York City, Ted also played professional basketball in England from 2000 to 2005, and I believe Ted will be joining us shortly. Terence Lee, who's joining us virtually, class of 2004, is executive director of City Squash, a not-for-profit after-school enrichment program based in the Bronx at Fordham University and in Brooklyn at Poly Prep Country Day School. He became executive director in 2014 after rejoining the organization as project director in 2012. After working at City Squash from 2005 to 2007, Terence attended the London School of Economics and Yale School of Management before going into the finance field and then returning to City Squash. And last but certainly not least is Tim McChristian, class of 1977, Executive Director of Madison Square Boys and Girls Club. The oldest Boys and Girls Club in New York City, Madison has provided effective programs and services to New York City's most under-resourced youth since 1884. Prior to joining Madison, Tim served as the Executive Director of the African Leadership Foundation, and I know most near and dear to both of our hearts as he happens to be my dad. Now, I'm excited to delve into this conversation to learn more about how each of these nonprofit leaders has used the gateway of sports to empower young people served by their organizations. So let's get into question one. Now, before we discuss how each of your individual organizations empower youth through the gateway of sports, I'd love for our audience to learn a little bit more about your personal connections to sports. This question is for all the panelists. Did sports personally serve as a gateway to your own youth development? And if so, how? And I think we'll start with Terence and then followed by Tim.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot, Andrea. I'm excited to be part of the discussion. Sports certainly did play an important part of my my upbringing, but I would say at the end of the day, you know, really like I was really blessed to be able to take part in a lot of different extracurricular activities, you know, be it music related, sports related, or whatnot. And so you know, it's actually reflecting on my childhood, I often am amazed at how much squash has shaped my life, given that I'm relatively late to the sport. So I grew up in Canada and grew up playing racquetball, and played that, from when I was very young, kind of up through high school. And when I went to Yale, there were no racquetball courts, let alone racquetball teams. So kind of me being kind of naive and quasi, arrogant in terms of thinking about my racket skills. I'm like, well, how different can this be? It's like, it's a racket, you're in a box. It's like the same thing. And so I was really lucky that the coach was very welcoming, let me walk onto the team. And so it was just an incredible, even at Yale, being part of the team there, just an incredible experience. And to echo what Andrea, the sentiment that you kind of opened with from the Mighty Ducks, just having that community and that layer of support, it's just really meaningful. But I feel like I've been really blessed to, in my childhood, to experience that in multiple different arenas, but certainly, I think at City Squash, if you talk to the students who are in our program, I think they really would cite kind of community and that feeling of like almost second family as being really core to the experience.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Terence. Same question for Tim.
I think I'm talking to the camera here. Sports for me actually played a critical role in my living in two worlds, as I call it. I'll give a short version of a much longer story. Ken can appreciate this, but I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, where everybody looked like me. But I was a nerd. I liked being in class and everything else, which is not necessarily a cool thing at the time. The good thing was I had a little sports skills, so I could hang out with the cool kids. And that was survival back then in the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And then in the 9th grade, I got on a plane and went to another world with the Andover. And all of a sudden, it was the exact opposite. I was not a nerd. I was struggling academically and didn't have a lot of confidence in the classroom. But I found out, at least on the sports court, on the basketball court, I could still compete. And so it gave me some sense of confidence and something I could do well in that very competitive environment. And it took me a couple of years for the academics to catch up with the athletics. And then the package came together and sports became part of who I was, and had a chance to play at Yale all 4 years. Although before Ted came along, we were not any good. They got much better afterwards. But for me, sports again was a door opener for me, and it also was a significant confidence booster.
Thanks so much, Tim. And Tim, perfect timing. So we're still so we're still on the first question. Just asking you if sports personally served as a gateway to your own youth development, and if so, how?
Yes, well, I had big footsteps to fill with Tim's Yale days, and to be clear, we got better at Yale after I graduated in basketball there. So I think the class after me was when they started winning. So I will take all the blame for that. And apologize for being late. We'll get to this, but we just opened our new facility and did ribbon cutting tonight, which is why I'm a little bit late. So I apologize for that. Yeah, but for me, basketball, like Tim, sort of growing up was my passion. It was what kept me motivated academically. It was what sort of drove me. It was where I developed my leadership and life skills. So it was a huge part of my life. I guess similar to Tim, I went to Yale, I played basketball there. After college, I played professionally in England for 5 years, got my master's at Oxford in social work while I was out there. And then for me, my passions were always basketball and helping kids. So that was sort of how I ultimately landed in my role at New Heights, which I guess I can jump into next.
Yeah, and Ted, you teed it up so nicely. So the next question, just to hear a bit more about your individual organizations, how they're using sports to empower young people, how the values are tied to that and specific models as well. I'd love to you continue what you already saying.
Sure, I've got catching up to do. Yeah, and I think for me, and I got involved in New Heights in 2005 when we became a nonprofit. And for me, I think it's, the value, the life skills that you develop through sports are transferable to the classroom, they're transferable to business and to life. And I think those have sort of what made me successful professionally. And I think that's what we want to instill in the kids that we serve at New Heights is, taking kids who have a passion for basketball and leveraging that and using those skills, that innate skills that you have by playing sports, to make sure they get transferred into other areas that are ultimately going to make them successful in life and whatever academic or career paths they pursue.
Great, thank you. And so I'll throw the same question at Terence. Terence, just to hear a little bit more about your organization, how's particularly using sports to empower young people.
Sure. I mean, similar to the model of New Heights, really City Squash uses the sport of squash as a vehicle to expose the students that we work with to different opportunities. And at the end of the day, as much as I love squash and people associated with the organization love squash, it's really not about squash at the end of the day. I would say, our preeminent goal that we have for all of our students is for them to become college graduates. Virtually all of them will or have been first generation college graduates. But I think just from personal experience, certainly, I and the others involved can really appreciate how much sports, and specifically squash, I think can play a really meaningful role in opening doors for people in the communities that we serve. And so, just to take a couple more minutes, in our country, even though squash was founded in England, there is a real unique link to squash in higher education. If you look at the schools that have, or if you look at the schools that have squash teams at the high school or college level, they all happen to be the most selective institutions in our country. And so by virtue of putting a racket in, children's hands, they all of a sudden are exposed to places that they otherwise would never think about, let alone set foot on. And so we have students every year that have the opportunity to travel to Harvard to play a squash tournament or spend a week living in the dorms at Williams College. And so it's just really been incredible to see from that standpoint. And so yeah, that's what we do.
Wonderful. And Tim?
Yeah, our approach at Madison Square Boys and Girls Club is, I guess, a little broader in that, our mission is, as an after-school provider, we serve kids from kindergarten to 12th grade, and we are basically trying to give them an opportunity to survive in many cases. Our mission is to save and enhance the lives of kids who are most in need of our services. And our services are organized in 3 areas: academic success, good character, leadership, and then healthy lifestyles. And obviously sport fits in the healthy lifestyle. So all of our programming is in one of those 3 areas. And I always talk about the value of the sports is it's on the menu of reasons why kids show up. If you think of the after-school environment for us anyway, younger kids, kindergarten through say 8th grade or 7th grade, they have to come because the parents say you better be there because at 6 o'clock they're going to come pick you up. Teenagers though, I call them like customers at IBM, they vote with their feet. They come in if they want to come in, and if they don't, they go somewhere else. So we have to have a menu of reasons for them to come in, and sports is on that menu. And so what we try to do is broaden that menu to include non-traditional. So everybody has a basketball court. Our basketball court has a rock climbing wall. We have a lacrosse program. We have a street hockey program. We have a swimming pool. So we have a variety of opportunities for kids to, again, choose and volunteer to come in and participate. And then once they come in, we have the organized structure that, similar to other programs. But sports is not what we lead with, but we want to make sure it's available as part of, again, our healthy lifestyle and choices and reinforcing the benefits of teamwork, physical activity, healthy eating.
And so, Ted and Terence, I'd like to actually pick up on the point that Tim just made, because your organizations use sports as the vehicle, but also have an overall comprehensive strategy to develop young leaders. And so I'd love for you to describe more about that holistic approach you take, where sports is obviously a major component, but how it's tied into overall development. So I guess I'll kick first, Ted, I'm looking right at you.
Yeah, I think, for us as well, I think it's using the sport, because that's, as we all said, that's why the kids want to come to us, and it's why they show up and lead with their feet. But again, for us, I think all 3 of us, it's really about what else we do. It's providing academic support. So at New Heights, we do high school and middle school academic tutoring. We have our own SEL curriculum where we're teaching life skills, using basketball as a lens, because again, it's something that's going to be engaging to kids and that they want to participate in. And then providing high school and college prep services. So it's really sort of a holistic and intentional approach to try and meet kids where they are and provide opportunities that they're going to be interested in. We try and make it a little different from school, because I think like all of us, kids are coming to us after school, weekends, and summertime. So we want it to be a little bit different, more unique, more engaging than what they're doing in school throughout the day. And again, using sports and things that they're interested in, I think is the hope to keep them involved. But again, as Terence and Tim said, it's about creating opportunities sort of off the field or off the courts to help them develop, academic proficiencies and help them ultimately, become successful adults and whatever career paths they want to follow.
Great. And Terence, did you have anything to add to that?
I would just add that, City Squash has always prided itself on being like an inch wide, mile deep. And so we're never going to be serving like thousands of youth, in the community. But for us, it's like for the students that we serve, it's a very deep and comprehensive commitment that we make. And I think one of the things that has distinguished kind of the way that we operate as an organization is the depth of the relationship that we have with those students. And so, today we will start with students as young as 3rd grade, and our intent and commitment to them is that we're going to work with them and serve them all the way until their college graduation day. So that's like a 14-year period. And at the end of the day, the longer that I'm part of this work, it's just, there's no real, it's like anything else. There's no real shortcuts, you can't, it's not something that can be crammed into just a few years, the issues that we're trying to work with our students to overcome, the things that we want them to achieve or help them achieve. It takes a tremendous amount of trust and faith on both parties, and that takes years, to develop the type of relationship that is going to create kind of a constructive and kind of symbiotic type of state, that we strive for.
Great. Thank you all for those answers. So something that always resonates with me is seeing the impact of powerful programming in a young person's life. When I taught Head Start, for example, I remember how meaningful it was watching students build their self-confidence as they learn new lessons and skills. Could each of you share a personal story of a young person that was directly impacted by your organization's charge of developing young people through sports programming specifically? Tim, we'll start with you.
I guess our best example is actually our sports director at our Flatbush clubhouse now, Joey Bellamy. He came through as a club kid. So he's been with us literally since he was, I think, 7 years old, and he now is 34. And he's about 4'8", 120 pounds, but he's ready to go to the NBA if you ask him. But he's one of those kids, he's a magnet to other kids. And so he literally grew up through the program. And when he tells his story, he talks about how it saved his life. We all have choices, and he talks about the choices he made as a kid growing up in the Flatbush neighborhood. His friends, some went to the left, some went to the right. He came to the clubhouse, and it gave him a safe and secure place to grow, and he used sports as that. And so he stayed with us over the years as a part-time worker, and now he is running the sports program. And we have 6 locations across the city, 3 in Brooklyn, 2 in the Bronx, and a beautiful location in Harlem. But his sports program is our showcase because of him and the passion that he has and the recognition in the community that he's somebody who's real. And so he's a great example of using sports as a magnet to get the kids to come in. Which again, for us, it's all about coming in the door. If you can come in the door, I can help you. I can change your life, I can save your life. But if you're outside hanging out, it's a lot harder. And so his role is to use basketball as a reason to get the kids to come in, and they do come in.
And Terence, I'll throw the same question to you.
Sure. I'll share the story of a young woman named Yesenia Pacheco. She was in City Squash's 3rd class, so joined the program in 2004. And she, her household, her mother's single parent, Ecuadorian immigrant. She had 2 older daughters, but Yesenia, we first met her in her middle school classroom in the Bronx. We like we do every fall. We present to every 3rd and 6th grade class, and we share with them what City Squash is and whatnot. And so she just got really excited and started showing up, and just worked so hard and was so committed. And ultimately a couple years later in our program earned a scholarship to the St. George's School in Rhode Island, where she really excelled academically and on the squash court. She was an interscholastic champion for squash, and then she ended up going on to play at Cornell, where she also captained and was a 2-time All-American. And she now lives in San Francisco. She's like an account executive at Box, the software company, and just has a really successful life. And it was one of the great joys of my life to be able to attend her wedding over the summer. And so it's just, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. You want to, as much as you want to take credit for the work, really at the end of the day, it's just helping provide a platform for our students to find their roots, and wings, and so it's really wonderful when you're able to kind of see the whole arc of the process unfold, like the way it has for Jasenia.
Wonderful.
These are hard to top. I guess the thing about this question, it sort of made it easier because I actually spoke to this one of our alums last week, so he's up. For me, it's a young man named Richard who came to us in 9th grade, so typically a little older than some kids got involved with us. But Richard is 6'8", so he obviously has an advantage on the basketball court. Wasn't particularly good at basketball though, and he would be first to admit it. Was a kid who was super smart, was sort of a straight A student without trying, but was going to sort of a failing public school in the Bronx, high school, where, most of his classmates weren't graduating, they had no college plans. But Richard, had a lot of promise and potential and sort of got involved with New Heights going into his 9th grade year, and just sort of tried to leverage that, the talent that was within him. We ultimately helped him, similar story to Terence, helped him transfer to boarding school. So he went to Suffield Academy up in Connecticut. Then he ultimately matriculated to Amherst, where he played spotty basketball. And I think basketball, helped him get into school, but it was sort of his leadership. He was class president at Suffield. He was on every single club I've heard of at Amherst. Really took advantage of that opportunity. Graduated with honors from Amherst. He worked with New Heights in the summertime in our summer program. He ultimately became the director of our summer program for 2 years. And he's now a dean at Success Academy Charter School in Brooklyn. And so I guess Terence, similar to you in terms of life experiences, he just had his first daughter a month ago. So he sent me a picture of her rocking her New Heights onesie, which was kind of cool. But again, I think it's that same story that, just providing opportunities for young people to help them flourish, I think is just sort of almost an obligation. I think probably why the 3 of us do the work we do is because kids have potential, they just need that opportunity to excel.
Powerful, powerful stories. So what advice would you all give if there's someone who's watching today who's interested in creating their own nonprofit to empower youth in sports or getting involved with starting up a program independently? What advice would you give to them who are interested in building such a program? What lessons learned from your own experiences could they take to create their own organization or nonprofit? And I'll leave this to anyone who wants to jump in before I call on people.
I would say just to do it. That there's a clear need and there's a major shortage in people and organizations that do this type of work. But it's very impactful and there's a reason why there are so many different kind of organizations that have different hooks, be it sports, be it chess, be it like whatnot, and because at the end of the day, like everybody's different, they have different interests, different things are going to click for them and connect for them. And that's part of the reason why at City Squash, we're so intentional or we have a rigorous process in terms of ultimately selecting who joins our program, not because we're trying to take the quote unquote best students or the best squash players. It's more because we recognize that, even though the ultimate goal of college access is relatively universal, the mechanism in which we use to do it, it's going to be most beneficial for a certain type of student, you know, that can not only have academic aspirations, but also have a genuine like excitement and passion for exerting themselves physically, right? And that may not be the case for everybody. You know, they might not want to get on court and chase the ball around in a box, you know. And so yeah, so I would say just do it, and it's you know, I would say also professionally, I found it to be just like tremendously gratifying. I think a lot of people get into the work because of a desire to, you know, feel that sense of connection to the community that you serve and work with, and to experience, you know, those really meaningful relationships that you develop. But I would say, and that certainly has been the case for me, but I think as the longer that I've done it, I've really come to appreciate just like the professional opportunities that come with this type of work. You know, I think just thinking back in terms of the level of responsibility and the variety of people that you interact with, it's, you know, it's just really rewarding and enriching. And I think that if you were to just start out in other industries or larger institutions or companies, I think it would take, I would say it would take a lot longer for folks to gain the same level of responsibility and access that I feel privileged to have, you know, on a daily basis.
Wonderful. Tim?
Sure, I'll go. I mean, I think for me, I think it's sort of two things. One, and Terence alluded to as well, I think one is sort of follow your passion. I mean, obviously the three of us are avid sports fans in various ways. But I think for me personally, it's, you know, I love basketball, and so I want to make a career around basketball. And obviously I wasn't good enough to play in the NBA, but being around a sport and something I'm passionate about, I think, you know, helps me go to work every day and makes me enjoy it. And I have a lot of friends who are doing a lot of other careers and you know, are very successful in their own right, but they don't enjoy going to work. So I think the first part is sort of follow your passion, what you're interested in, whether it's squash, basketball, arts, chess, whatever it may be. And then I think the second thing that I found in this work is sort of start small and set realistic goals. Sort of talk to a lot of people who say, I want to run this organization and serve, you know, 10,000 kids or 1,000 kids or be in 25 high schools across New York City. And I always say, well, start with, you know, how about start with one school or one class, or serve 10 kids or 20 kids and figure out how to do it well before you start growing it. Because I think that's, and we've had this issue at New Heights and learned along the way, but I think that's when the challenge is and obviously Terence is good about this with their organization, is, you know, start small and make a real impact and learn as you go. And it's easier to do that when you have a smaller cohort or a group of kids that you're working with than when you're trying to serve thousands of kids right off the bat. It's hard to measure your success. It's hard to know what's going well and what's not. So I think sort of setting sort of simple, small, concrete goals, and, you know, if you can impact one kid, that's, you know, a miracle and a blessing. Sort of start small, and again, if it's one class, if it's one squash team, if it's one basketball team, whatever it may be, but sort of, you know, work with that group and really try to provide for them. And then if it works, do more. And if it doesn't work, you know, course correct and figure out how to fix it.
Now to pick up on that, I spent 35 years in the corporate world before I came into the nonprofit world. And my advice to anybody jumping into the nonprofit world is treat it like it's a business. Passion's got to be there. You can't fake the passion. But most nonprofits are failing not for lack of passion and quality programming, but for lack of funding and operational strategy and execution. And so I think the idea of taking that passion and treating it like it's a real profitable business with a business case that has, you know, risk and supply and all the other variables that you need to do in your forecasting will help you ensure likelihood of success, because the enthusiasm runs out long before the money, or the money runs out long before the enthusiasm does. And so that's the biggest challenge I think nonprofits are facing these days, is having a sustainable program model to deliver the services that you want to deliver to your core group. And then to scale up requires a solid financial base, which again, all of us I think have a various strategy for it, but it's always, you're always chasing dollars, just like in any other business, to support the passion.
Great. And so this is my last question before I open it up to audience Q&A. So if anyone had any burning questions that came up, from this great conversation. Please save them for after this, but I'd be remiss if we were in a nonprofit space and didn't ask if you had any events, galas coming up, if there were any volunteer opportunities that people could get tuned into. This is a plug time for any of your organizations, if there's any way that people watching can tap into what you're doing. I think people would love to hear it because we're all empowered and revved up from everything that's happened and we want to be part of it. And so I'll just, again, maybe start with Terence, Tim, and then Ted, just a plug for anything coming up that people watching can get tapped into, volunteer opportunities, anything, so we can be in touch with your organizations.
Sure, thanks. You know, we're very grateful for all the volunteers that work with us over the years, and there's a lot of different ways for folks to get involved. You really don't have to know anything about squash to be involved, in spite of how many usually feel initially. So we have tutoring. Academic tutoring is just a really popular thing, and then we also have a mentoring program where we basically pair all of our students with a professional in the New York City area, starting in their fifth grade year. But the idea is that it's similar to kind of like a big brother, big sisters type of relationship, where the mentor gets to develop a more individual, personal relationship with one of our students. And it's been really wonderful to see that relationship span multi-years, in many cases. We also have, maybe a little less intense, is we have career mentors who just help give advice, review resumes, things like that, more on an ad hoc basis. That's a little bit less demanding, but we're always looking for people to get involved. And so, please feel free to reach out if anybody is interested.
We happen to have our 55th annual Christmas tree ball coming up right across the street at Cipriani 42nd Street on December 3rd. But to bring it to a Yale connection, I have a board member, Bruce Gale, who's Yale class of 50-something. He's been to 51 of the 55 Christmas galas. And his son, John Gale, is my Yale class of 77 classmate, and he's also on our board. So we have a fundraising model that works, and it's always really to join. But from a professional development standpoint, we have a young professionals board called Madison Council. And we have about 120 members. And again, it's just that young professionals, mid-career. And it's a good chance to get connected to our programs, but also access to our senior board, which from a professional development standpoint, a lot of people find interesting because of this. Again, mentoring and development for professionals is something that is always helpful, and we have direct access. So if anyone's interested in our Madison Council, we can definitely recruit for that too.
I guess for us, we say tap in. I think I'm a little tapped out. We hosted our annual gala last week, which was the New Heights' launch of our new facility. And again, I apologize for being late. I literally just came from cutting the ribbon of our facility just now.
Describe the facility. I don't think they understand what exactly.
So we are. So we're the anchor tenant in the Bedford Union Armory, which is one of the big iconic armories in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And so it's a 60,000 square foot facility, which New Heights is the anchor tenant. We have about 50% of the square footage there. So we have 3 full-size basketball courts, classrooms, tech lounge, conference rooms, office spaces. So we're sort of consolidating our whole organization under one roof, finally, and having a home, which we're trying to like Madison Square, and you guys, Tim. But so, for us, it's a game changer for us, and it's going to enable us from serving a couple hundred kids a year to literally thousands of kids as we do more programming with schools and other community organizations and really grow. So I guess that's sort of the segue in terms of there's lots of new opportunities on the horizon to get involved with New Heights, similar to Terence in terms of volunteer opportunities. So tutoring, mentoring, we're launching a career assist program where we're working with our college students and providing more career mentorship opportunities. We're doing sort of community basketball leagues. We're looking for volunteer coaches on weekends. So there's lots of opportunities there. And then also similar to Tim, we have an Emerging Leaders Council, which we're not quite as big as you guys yet. We have about 40 members. But again, it's sort of a young professionals board where We're engaging, the next generation of board members and leaders in the city. So lots on the horizon and sort of just getting started for us. So we'd love to have some good Yale and other people involved. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, I mean, I don't have any athletic ability, much to my father's chagrin, but I'm ready to do some, three-pointers after this wonderful panel we had and all the energy and excitement that was generated. And so I want to open it up if there's any audience Q&A, both from those watching remotely and those here in the room that you want to ask our wonderful panel.
I've got a question, Andrea. So I'd love to, panelists, thank you. It's really inspiring. I think everyone's heard about Mackenzie Scott, who's giving out these waterfall grants, no application. She's got a scouting team and she picks out the high performance organizations that she thinks would be great recipients for her philanthropy. Grants of $10, $20 million. I'm wondering how each of the panelists, if they were on the receiving end of a Mackenzie Scott grant.
Are you offering one?
Maybe we could start planting some seeds here. But how each of you, again, put you on the spot, how each of you would spend that money?
For us, it's scale. We have a sizable footprint in New York City with 5 physical clubhouses, big 40,000 square foot buildings. That's our model. And so we believe that's a model that allows us to execute the programs that we know how to do well to have high impact. So the idea of building more physical facilities, despite the move online, there's still a benefit to kids coming into a physical place on a daily basis. And they're expensive to build. We just built a $45 million clubhouse in Harlem, 45,000 square feet. So we know the model. And so I would take that money and probably look to the next neighborhood. We've already outlined neighborhoods we think are right for this model. And that would be the opportunity.
Yeah, similarly, I'd say it's to follow in the footsteps of New Heights and Ted. We've been really blessed to have wonderful partnerships in our 20 years of existence. In collaborating with Fordham University and Poly Prep Country Day School. That said, unquestionably, especially coming off of this year with COVID, if there was ever a time that underscored the benefits of being a land facility owner versus being a tenant, this year certainly underscores the benefits of having that type of autonomy. So for us, it would be probably to spend towards capital facilities in both the Bronx and the Brooklyn, and then also I would say just on the staffing front, it's just kind of fairly typical for nonprofits to always feel as though they're stretched pretty thin in terms of what everybody's wearing multiple hats, doing more than they can. So I as I said in my earlier remarks, so much, even as we serve more students, and City Square serves far fewer than these other organizations. We've got about 250 students that we serve, but yes, of course, you need scale and processes in order to make it work. But at the end of the day, I'm a really firm, it still comes down to that individual relationship that you have with that student. And so, that's where the magic happens. You need to have people that are on the front lines that care deeply and are willing to kind of pour their heart and soul into that work. And that's not really that scalable. There's a limit to that. So I would say, capital and personnel would be where that, that money would go to.
Yeah, I think for me, we're sort of on this massive growth trajectory. So Ken, please send her my way. We're over the next sort of year and a half, we're going to double our full-time, double our part-time staff. We're going to be sort of 10 times more kids. So we're sort of in this big ramp up. And I think it's the balance of going deeper and providing more opportunities and more holistic programming for our kids, but also having a slightly broader reach. So we're sort of trying to do a little bit of both, and then there's a strategic intentionality of how we're doing it. But again, I think for us, we're in this big growth phase, and we want to be able to serve the kids that we're serving. First, serve them better, and then as we learn from that, be able to serve more kids in that. So obviously, funding is a critical part, primarily with staffing and resources. To provide those safe spaces and those quality programming for the kids that we work with.
Great question, Ken. Were there any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much for a really inspiring conversation. I don't quite have a $20 million question like Ken, but I wanted to pick up on a thread that I think the three of you touched on. I think in the nonprofit world, we often talk about a balance or sometimes tension between kind of community-led initiatives and strategies versus sometimes, certain organizations can take more of a top-down approach. I think there are conversations that there can sometimes be a disconnect between whether it's boards or volunteers and the communities that the organization serves. And Tim, your story about your the guy, the 4'8" guy who came through your program and is now running your director of sports, that was so inspiring. And Terence, I was blown away by kind of what you mentioned, that City Squash works with students from 3rd grade all the way through graduation for 14 years. That must take so much commitment, and you mentioned kind of the importance of community ties. So I guess I'm curious to hear from the three of you kind of how you involve community members and the students, the families that you're serving through, whether it's through your programming and your strategies and identifying the needs of the community and how you handle that.
For us, it's a little more straightforward because we're a direct service provider. So we're providing after-school services for parents who need a place, particularly for the younger kids to go. One of the offerings we do is we provide a hot meal every day to all of our members that come into the clubhouse. We do surveys of our members and say, why do you come to the Boys and Girls Club? And you'd be surprised at the answers you get. Very often it's because I get a hot meal every day. It can be like basketball. It could be because my friends come here. I can play on the computer. So having this ability to meet the needs of the community is really what keeps us ingrained in the community, because we're providing needed service, not optional, right? I mean, people need after school services for their kids. We saw that during COVID more than ever. When that was taken away, it really destroyed a lot of the underbelly of mental health and wellness in our community. So I think staying relevant to the needs of the community. And our easy example was doing things you never knew you needed to do until you need to do them. And we started running food pantries. 3 weeks after the shutdown, March 13th, we started opening up food pantries at all 6 of our locations. And we did it for over a year, every week. And the lines remained down the block and around the corner. But that embedded us to the community because, again, they knew who we were as a Boys and Girls Club. Now they knew us as a food pantry provider. And, our roots are even deeper in the communities we serve.
I think one example, and sort of fresh on this for us with, building our new facility is it's important to hear the voices of our kids and families. So when we were building our whole facility, we had a community committee that was made up of our kids, parents, staff members, alums, and local community members. And so as we were designing our space, it was really what does this community committee want? It's not what I want, it's not what the board wants, it's what are the kids and families who are going to be in our space every day, what's going to make them feel like this is home for them, and hearing their voices. And so I think that's sort of one concrete example, but I think it's also, and we probably do it more than they want, and I'm sure someone for Tim is just doing sort of pre and post surveys and just talking to the kids and families and saying, what do they like, what don't they like, what do they want in our programming, because I think we can imagine what we think our kids and families need, but until we actually do this simple thing of asking them what they want and is this working or not working, I think we're trying to always get input from them. And I think that's important to run dynamic programming, is to actually do something that the kids and parents want and need, as opposed to just prescribing something and just assuming that people want that.
Yeah, I would say, one of the things that I kind of gleaned from the question is just connecting the various different, not just the community we serve, but like the different communities that play a role in the work that we do. And so I think that's something that we've put a lot of thought into over the years. And so for us, we take a pretty personalized approach to that as well. I think at the end of the day, kind of the, not that it's the core function, but like the best marketing for our program are like the students and the team members themselves. And so, to that end, one of the things we often have students do during normal times is they'll travel to a lot of different squash tournaments, generally in the Northeast or whatnot. And so for years now, we've always really gone out of our way to try to have our team members hosted by just like local families that are also have children competing in the squash tournaments or whatnot. And that's really created really beautiful interactions and relationships, across, really diverse and disparate backgrounds. And like most of our board members today, the relationships started with some interaction at a squash tournament where they saw a city squash team member playing. And they're like, oh, their children played a city squash team member, or they ended up hosting them. And then they got like inspired and more connected to the organization. So I think that kind of relationship has really helped excite the network of supporters that we have, but it's not without challenges and tension. Especially you just look at this last year in terms of everything that kind of came to bear in the wake of George Floyd and all those other instances that were circulating really publicly in the media. I think that we've spent a lot of this year, introspecting on how we can be better, how we can create more welcoming and positive experiences for our students. And we're lucky that we're now 20 years in, and so we have alumni like Jasenia, the young woman I referenced to, who are like adults now, and so we have an alumni board now that we really lean heavily on in terms of providing feedback and counsel in terms of how we can make the experience more inclusive and positive, for the younger students that are following in their footsteps.
Great, that's a great question. Any other questions?
I have a question. So we know that sports is a major external motivator for students, right? And especially hot food as well. But when it comes to empowering the youth, one of the tasks is also harnessing that intrinsic motivation. So how do your respective organizations help students not just be externally motivated by sports, by having them come in through the door for that, but building that sense of motivation within themselves?
I guess I'll start. So, our we have sort of 4 core values that we teach our kids, which we call the tree of success. So it's teamwork, respect, effort, and excellence. And I think those are things that we try to talk about when we're on the basketball court with them. And then those are also the skills we try and talk about with them when they're in the classroom, or when they're in their community activities, or when they're around their families. And so I think part of that for us is giving examples of how do those values show up on the basketball court, which is sort of the easy part, and I think kids can get that. What does it mean to be a leader on the basketball court? We have to teach a lot of that, but a lot of that is your term intrinsic. And then it's like, what does leadership look like in school? What does leadership look like in your community? And so I think once they start thinking about those terms, for us through the lens of basketball, it's easier to sort of translate that. What does success look like, in the classroom, in the court, and in your community? What does respect look like? Again, how do you show respect on the court and across all those different areas? So I think for us, it's sort of starting with the basketball, and that helps sort of illuminate what it should look like or could look like in other areas.
I follow that. For us, sports is just an access point to what do you want to do, what do you want to be, whether it's college access, workforce development, arts. Sports is just an enabler to help get the conversation started. So we just try to use it as a reason, again, to come in and then explore, once you're in the door, all these other avenues to help these kids fulfill their opportunities and access.
Yeah, I'd say that, no, I think it's like a really great question. And, because, sports is kind of a thing where it's like you're always built up to like you want to win. You need to like get the trophy or get the medal, and if you don't do that, then you're not as good. And and so I think that we've struggled a lot in recent years in terms of trying to change that narrative in our students' minds, and that kind of mentality, I think, manifested itself in a lot of different ways and a lot of different arenas besides just the squash court. So for example, one of the big things that we help enable is, students who are really motivated and want to pursue kind of a private school education in their 8th grade year. We'll help them apply to boarding schools, and we've sent many students to boarding schools, and the same thing with selective colleges. But that experience of seeing other students go away from the Bronx and you kind of staying in the Bronx, even unintentionally, it can leave this kind of feeling of, oh, I'm not as good, or I'm being left behind, or whatnot. And so we've had like a lot of conversations and dialogue internally about really how to recenter that conversation and how team members can really just center themselves more around like everybody has a different path, and it's just a matter of finding what path is best for you, and that doesn't mean one is better than the other or whatnot. And so I think that I think having that conversations, having our staff really attuned to those types of dynamics has been really helpful. More specifically, also we've like devoted a lot more energy and resources in recent years to our social work services. And so like counseling has become like a much more prominent pillar to what we offer at City Squash. And so I think and not just individual counseling, but we also have partners that come in that will facilitate like circle conversations amongst classes and smaller cohorts of people. And I think that just that kind of dialogue and openness has also just made people feel more included and kind of elevated the voice of some folks that are maybe sometimes like the spotlight is less on them because they might not be the ones like bringing home the hardware or whatnot. But yeah, that's kind of what we've done. But it's definitely a challenge.
Wonderful. So I think that we're at our time, but please join me in giving a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. Information for their respective organizations to follow up, but thank you so much everyone who was able to join us, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Somebody had questions. Oh. Somebody had a question.
Put in the chat.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we'll have to email it in. Sorry.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Great.